Oh my God, it is December the 9th.
Not Friday.
It's Thursday, Keith,
It's
but
Thursday.
it's really Friday, symbolically in our own minds. I was away last week. I was in London. How did you survive without me last week?
I didn't do a video. There were a few questions. Where's the video? But I didn't do one. I did the newsletter, but not the video. And in fact, there's probably quite a lot of talking points from last week's as well. But given that it's now this week, we'll ignore that.
Well, I've been away 2 weeks, and what happens? We've got Web 3.0, or not even Web 3. It's 3.0. It's Web 3. It's finally arrived, Keith, has it?
Well, no, it hasn't
Well,
arrived.
you know how I know it's arrived? It's not Web 3.0, it's Web 3. You know how I know it's arrived? Because there's now a piece about it on NPR. Once NPR picks something up, it's for real.
Actually, it's interesting. I've got the NPR piece in the newsletter, and they say Web 3, shorthand for Web 3.0. It's not much of a shorthand.
Yeah, it's not 3. I mean, the whole point of Web 3 is it's not 3.0, right? Isn't it?
I don't know what the difference is. It's
in
3.
my mind, it's a huge difference.
Well,
because it's not 2.0. I mean, there was two. Firstly, there was never Web 1 because no one ever talked about that. Then there was Web 2.0, and now there's Web 3, which is entirely different.
Well, according to this graphic, there was the internet before the web. I remember that time, actually.
Remember the internet?
I do. Before the web, the internet before the web, there was apps called Gopher and FTP.
I remember that one.
So this one says Web 1.0 was the read-only.
What's this image from? Is this yours or somebody else's?
Somebody else's. I thought it was quite good, actually.
It's good, except that it's not 1.0, 2.0, 3.0.
Well, that's just semantic. It doesn't matter. Whatever you call it, it's distinct eras in applications.
So what years are we talking about? 80 through 2000, 2000 through 220, so 2020. So it's sort of 20-year segments. Is that fair?
Yeah. Well, the internet was everything before 1994. Web 1.0.
Yeah, let's say if we date it back to 80 when people started emailing each other.
Yeah. Web 1 was 94 through to around about 2003, 4, 5-ish. Web 2 started in 2005-ish when TechCrunch started, and
that is a very TechCrunch centric view. I think Web 2.0 started with Google in 1999.
No, Google's very much thought of as Web 1.0 because it's the read-only web. The read-write is Web 2. When you blogs, and RSS and all of that.
Yes and no. I take your point, but on the other hand, what was revolutionary and what remains revolutionary about Google is that the intelligence of Google was derived from a collective intelligence. So it wasn't the traditional top-down publishing model of a search engine like Yahoo in the mid-90s. So I see Google as the first Web 2.0 company.
Well, I think if you think counting links is interactive in some way, then you're right. But they never thought of themselves like that. In fact, at that time, I was a partner of Google then, and I created this thing where you could type in a FedEx number into the browser address bar and go straight to FedEx and get your tracking stuff. And that was Real Names. And Real Names wasn't really Web 2.0 either, but we were very interactive. We were kind of Web 2.0 in some ways.
Well, let's call Google Web 1.8 or 1.9. But anyway, let's fast forward and go to Web 3. So what's the news on Web 3 this week? Why is it becoming more and more real?
Well, the first thing is the people with the money are starting to notice. So Sequoia Capital this week rebranded themselves as being Web3 friendly, having not previously made any investments in anything crypto or distributed. They suddenly made a big investment, and as a show of force, they turned their YouTube investment memorandum from 2005 into an NFT and sold it for close to $1 million.
It's fascinating, and they've sort of appropriated or borrowed the language of Web3.
Yes.
They in the links that you had in your newsletter this week. Sequoia Capital, they sound like rappers or hackers or something.
Yeah, yeah. They like, everyone who's into Bitcoin knows that you've got to hold, but it's spelled HODL. And and Sequoia says you got to build, but they spell it
Yeah. When I
BUIDL.
read that, I thought, oh, Keith's misspelling. And then I realized that I was the old fashioned one, that misspelling is the future.
So the first
Misspelling, and maybe we should call it WBE3.
Exactly. So there's your first thing. The first thing is NPR and Sequoia Capital have both noticed.
But
Then
NPR is a big deal because that's when mainstream media begins to wake up and take notice that something structural has changed. It's not just another startup or even a new technology. It's a new way of doing business.
Yeah. And then the next thing is there's this whole meme coming around something called creator coins and the future of income, which is basically focused on creators like ourselves who want to get paid, don't want to charge subscriptions. So we basically would publish on the distributed internet and have tokens. Each of us would have tokens, and those tokens would be exchangeable for other tokens to buy and sell things. That's a kind of a bubbling under meme, and there's lots of investment going into that area.
So how would that work for us? We would
we would basically, instead of doing a $9 a month subscription for a newsletter of, for example, this show, everybody who watched it would have to log on with their crypto wallet, and for every minute they watched, it would take a fractional piece of value out of their wallet and put it into our wallet, basically.
Nice. Why don't we do it, Keith? We, meaning you, because I can't. I don't know how to do it.
I don't know how to do it. I don't know.
If you don't know how to do it, who does?
I don't really want to do it. That's because I'm not looking to get paid for being.
No, but it's an interesting experiment, and that's what we've always been dreaming about on the creator side: is incremental payments.
Yeah, and then the next bit of evidence is Jack Dorsey, having resigned from his role as CEO of Twitter, and putting in place a crypto-friendly techie CEO. Changed the name of Square to Block. Obviously, doesn't take a lot of imagination to add the word.
I wonder how much he paid for that. The Block.
The Block, exactly. Probably quite a bit. So there's and then finally WhatsApp has deployed crypto wallets now, so you can send money to people in WhatsApp using a crypto token called USDP, which is a stable coin.
So finally, Facebook are figuring, or Meta, whatever they call themselves, are figuring out a business model for WhatsApp.
And then David Marcus, who was leading the effort of Libra at what used to be called Facebook and is now Meta. We've talked about Libra a lot on the show and how
it failed, didn't it?
It was failed, and we always said it would fail.
And then it came back.
And it's obviously still failing because he's leaving. But his colleagues who he did Meta with, I won't jump to it now, but they're in the company of the week this week because his former colleagues just raised $36 million. One can only assume he's going to be helping them somehow as a first round of investing for a new independent version of a crypto play. So there's a heck of a lot going on.
I mean, we always used to joke, Keith, about baseball innings, but that's a bit boring. In historical terms, if Web 2.0 was, say, born in the late 90s and became real in 2003 or 4, what year are we in with Web 3?
I think we're still in the late 90s, but capital.
But it's inevitable, isn't it? I mean, this is unavoidable. It's going to happen at some point.
I think so, because it's. I'll tell you what the challenges are. The challenges are it's still very geeky.
Well,
As
that's
you,
inevitable too. That's always the case with these new technologies.
it's always the case. Funnily enough, I just had to do an interview with my youngest son for a school project in his computer science class, and it asked the question, "How does the internet work?" For example, when you type in a URL, how do you get the content? And I found myself describing the steps, and it's totally geeky because it involves knowing about TCP/IP routing, the DNS protocols. You have to understand all of that to explain how a URL comes into a browser. Well, this is just as geeky, but it's a different set of geekery that's unfamiliar even to the geeks. So there's a learning curve.
And then I don't know whether you had this in your newsletter this week, but Tim Berners-Lee's raised what 30 million for his new venture, which I guess is a Web3 venture, is it?
You know, we talked about it when it happened, and I've forgotten what it is. So I think it was to do with identity and safety, wasn't it, or something?
But Berners-Lee's always innovative and always on the edge. I'm sure he's not just going back to Web 2.
Inrupt is the name of the company. Here, I just
Mm.
found it. This is on TechCrunch, which is my go-to place for news about anything tech. 30
Yeah,
million.
and that's the ultimate. I don't even know if that's a Web 2.0 company. I think of it as a Web 1.0 company. It's journalists writing stories and then publishing them, right?
Yeah, and this is today's news, by the way. It isn't in the newsletter because it happened after I finished the newsletter. But it enables users to store their personal data in a pod. So it's basically many years in the making. Kevin Marks, who I know you know, used to talk about this a lot. It's basically giving you control over your own data on the internet in a storage space that's yours, and separating it from a central authority, if you like.
Right. So the two biggest flaws of Web 2.0, I've written about this a lot, and I think even you would acknowledge this, although maybe you wouldn't, is firstly, it's a winner-take-all economy where you have a tiny handful of companies that control everything: Facebook, Google, Amazon. And the other problem is privacy and the business model of Web 2.0, which is surveillance capitalism. At least that's the term that Shoshana Zuboff uses. How does Web 3 address either of those two?
You know, it can address them. I would argue, and I think you might even agree with this, that pretty much the entire history of publishing since the printing press was first invented has been funded by targeting consumers with advertising. That's how it mostly has been funded.
Well, not in the 16th and 17th centuries.
Even then, classifieds and such. I mean,
right.
The money you paid for the newspaper didn't cover its costs. Its costs were covered by other revenue.
But classifieds in the newspapers, that's not surveillance capitalism. You can put an ad in, and if you want to respond, that's fine. But no one's selling their data or exchanging data.
Well, if you look at the history of mailing lists, it goes back more than 100 years.
Yeah, but I accept that anyway.
So basically, Web3 envisages a model where the people who provide resources to the network get rewarded for providing the resources through tokens that are created on the network through the protocols themselves.
So is this the dream of easily and effectively selling one's own data? So if you have tokens, say on Facebook, you can choose to place your data on Facebook, and in exchange they will pay you, or a Facebook-like product?
Well, it starts with, you got to understand what a protocol is. If you don't understand what a protocol is, you can't really imagine.
Explain what a protocol is.
So a protocol is a way of achieving a goal through software. So, for example, SMTP is the protocol that allows email to be delivered.
Okay.
POP3 is the protocol that allows email to be received, pulled from a server into your client. So the whole internet works on protocols. Now, normally protocols are open source software put together into a service by a private company who charges you money to use the protocol. But in Web3, the protocols themselves are open source and nobody owns them or packages them. Basically, they run on the network, which means computers all over the world. And in order to use the protocol, for example, if you want to retrieve email using a protocol in Web3, the server you pull from would get paid by you from your wallet some kind of fractional amount every time you pull.
It's very nicely explained, Keith. Even I understand that.
Yeah.
Maybe you should write a book about Web3.
So protocols are, if Vint Cerf would have done TCP/IP using a Web3 approach, him and Bob Cohn would be rich by now, because they would have,
or Berners-Lee with
Berners-Lee with HTTP would be super rich. So the idea that a protocol itself rewards those who provide the services to it means there isn't a company rewarding you, it's the protocol rewards you, and it's built
You're still
in.
owning the protocol. So, and if your protocol takes off, then you're going to be even richer than Bezos or Zuckerberg, won't you?
Yeah, exactly.
So the idea of, so in a way, a Web3 winner-take-all world is even more chilling than Web 2.0. Well, you own the protocol, and that protocol becomes dominant. If you're the Vint Cerf or the Tim Berners-Lee of Web 3,
except they won't. Well, the difference is they don't own the network and they don't own the governance. That's actually one of the big differences.
Right.
The network is fully distributed in the hands of all kinds of people. And the
when you say they don't own the network, I don't understand what that means.
Well, you know, Facebook owns its own data centers and computers and routers, and so can enforce policies. And governance is at the board of directors level or the management team level at Facebook. In Web3, the governance is built into the protocol, and everyone who owns tokens gets to vote on changes in policy.
If they want to vote. So who owns the network? Is there a network in Web3?
There is a network, but it's made up of volunteers contributing resources to it in order to get paid.
But there is an internet still.
Yeah, the TCP/IP still exists, and these computers.
So that's the foundation. That's the basic layer.
Yeah, although there are attempts, like there's a company called Dfinity that tried to replace the actual internet with a new internet. They called it the Internet Computer. So some people think that the internet will get replaced. I'm not one of those. I think it sits on top of the internet.
So where's the first place that this is going to get real? We know with Web 1 it was music and media.
Yeah.
Web 2 was, I guess, social media or search. Where is the first place where we're going to really have profound change with Web 3?
We're already seeing it. I mentioned it in the editorial, which is savings and interest. So
it's a financial thing.
That's certainly the killer app right now, is that you can earn 20% interest on your savings.
All right.
That we've talked about before.
I'm still, to me, that spells Enron, but maybe I don't understand it.
Yeah, there's 3 links in my editorial to the 3 elements that make up that capability, and it's just one example. That there's other examples where you earn less than 20%, but you still earn 8 or 9%. It's distributed finance, basically, where the network plays the role of the bank and the rules. So
but someone still is governing that the rules of the crypto rules. I mean, you will claim that everyone's voting, but it's like on Wikipedia, some people vote more than others. As Orwell said, some people are more equal than others.
Yeah, although you need 50% to win. So it's in the larger things like blockchain, Bitcoin, it would be impossible to get 51% and win a vote that could end up with you being reckless. So trust is kind of built in because it's impossible to be subverted for the most case. And that's certainly true with distributed finance. The built-in rules. it gets very geeky. But for example,
what about the? I mean, it seems like the core evolution is in power, or in
yeah,
the way in which
power.
power is
Yeah,
redistributed
power is
or
distributed to the.
fragmented.
Yeah, power is distributed to the users actually.
What happens if
And
they don't want power? They just want to spend tokens or enjoy the internet.
they don't have to do anything. So it's
So what you're
not,
saying is whatever you do in Web3, you have power.
in properly implemented Web3, yes. There's a whole range of
Right.
claims to be Web3, and some of them are quite centralized and are not truly distributed.
And I guess that's going back to Google. The more we used Google, the smarter Google became, the more powerful Google became. So it was a top-down power structure where we may have benefited from the intelligence of the search engine because it was a crowdsourced product.
Yeah.
But Google reaped, the corporation Google reaped all the profits. What you're saying is that a Web3 search engine would be one in which there was no Google, and we would all reap the collective economic and intellectual benefits of a smart search engine.
Yeah. So sorry, my dog's barking. Is it very loud on your side? Let me go and stop it.
What does your dog think about Web3, Keith?
Woof woof. No, so basically, look, if you think about Google, Google is not really collective intelligence. It's data analytics that sits on top of user behavior. So it's not unlike Facebook mining your behavior.
Right.
Google is mining behavior, and it's true that the more it mines, the more it knows, and the better it becomes. That's definitely true. But it's an index using data. It's very similar to my Signal Rank company. We are mining data to do with investing.
Well, but what Google did was download the entire internet to acquire its intelligence, which no one else had ever done before.
Well, it downloaded every link and counted them. It didn't download the internet. It didn't download the content.
Yeah, so it downloaded the links and established intelligence in that way. The more links, the higher you appeared in the search engine.
Yeah, this dog's not shutting up, so I'm going to go and shut it up.
Go and shut the dog up. Shoot the dog.
Luna, what are you barking at? Poor dog. When it gets dark, she sees her own reflection in the door, and then there's Christmas lights down the street. So she's barking.
I said shoot the dog. I'll probably get into trouble with the animal rights groups.
You would.
So all this is very interesting, but you say it's happening first in crypto.
Well, crypto is just the economic mechanism that's embedded within it. Distributed computing, theoretically at least, could exist if everyone volunteered resources, even without crypto. But the minute you want to reward the contributors, you need a mechanism, and crypto is that mechanism.
I don't understand, by the way, why NFTs are Web3. It's just, it doesn't seem to be. I understand what they are, and they're interesting.
I don't think NFTs are.
But it's just a way of monetizing content.
Yeah, and NFTs are much more to do with uniquely labeling a thing using a let's call it a certificate, and therefore being able to pass ownership of a digital thing between people without being fearful that you're getting a copy. You're getting the original, if you like. And that is not necessarily part of Web3, but it also can be. It depends how you do it. And
Keith, with your Hegelian background, you're very familiar with contradictions. And is there a contradiction between a company like Sequoia or Andreessen Horowitz, which are classic top-down businesses, reinventing themselves in Web3 language and infrastructure? Can companies like Andreessen Horowitz and Sequoia survive in a Web3 world, or do they have to basically shut down?
Logically, they should not survive. If Web3 was applied to venture capital, and that's what the main article in this week's newsletter talks about, basically crowdfunding into startups across the network through software would become viable without breaching the securities laws as well, which prevent unaccredited investors from owning stocks
Right.
in private companies. So you could definitely, when I was trying to figure out what I want to do next, one of the options is to do a Web3 version of capital raising, and uh, I think we're moving towards that. The first step is accepting stable coins as a form of investment into a fund, which is already happening. It's just the first step, but eventually I think crypto becoming a legitimate currency to invest and it being sourced from projects all over the world, certainly technically speaking, there's nothing preventing it already.
So maybe all this is why Andreessen and Horowitz buying up half of Las Vegas and retiring there. You have a link about that in the newsletter too.
Yeah, I don't know how much trust we can put into this, but
well, there's certainly some truth in it. They've bought real estate there, and they are stepping back, maybe a half step back in terms of their management roles at the VC.
Yeah, they describe themselves as coaches. Is it coaches or player coaches? Player coaches.
Yeah.
And obviously, as we all know from the world of English Premier League football, player coaches don't last very long. They stop being players and they become coaches. That's the aging mechanism in soccer, and it could well be, as you said to me off air earlier, that this is simply the aging mechanism of Mark Andreessen and Ben Horowitz, and they're ready to take.
Yeah, I don't see it as a big deal. I mean, these men are some of the richest individuals in the world. They don't need the money. So
yeah,
and I think it's also bound up in this obsession in the Bay Area with people moving, whether it's to Texas or Miami or Las Vegas, which to me is kind of neither here nor there. It's not very interesting.
It's not interesting. What do all those places have in common? Low tax regimes. So one suspects.
Yeah, but Horowitz and I mean, they're so wealthy. They can pay 80% tax and still be wealthier than almost anyone in the world. It makes no difference. So, uh, what about startup of the week, Keith? We've talked enough of Web3, and we will talk more and more about it. I think next year. I think 2022 may be the year where Web3 becomes common parlance.
So I put two in this week. I put the first one in because one of our regular viewers, Wes Hassan, runs corporate development at this company, Encode, and this week it raised $220 million and became a unicorn. And he'd never said previously that he worked there or gave a clue that he was involved in such a great startup, but he is, and they did. So it gets to be startup of the week at the top.
And what do they do?
They're a identity verification. So are you really Andrew Keene?
When that's a philosophical question, isn't it?
No, it can be, but it's also factual if you're opening a bank account. So they basically verify that you are who you say you are.
So that's a Web 2 company, or certainly not. It's a Web 3 company.
Web 3 also has, KYC and AML issues that need to be built into these protocols. So it can be.
And it's an Andreessen are leading the investment.
No, that's the second one. I put two startup of the weeks. The second one is Mysten Labs, and Mysten Labs is the ex-Facebook crypto engineers who Andreessen did invest in, and these are David Marcus's former colleagues that we mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
They are building a blockchain infrastructure startup. It's a bit vague. We don't know fully what it is yet. We'll find out, but worth the mention because it's obviously something.
And speaking of Facebook, I saw that maybe it's not in the newsletter, but Bill Gates said today that he expects within 4 years all of us to be using avatars and virtual reality to become the reality. So maybe Zuckerberg's timing is just right for reinventing Facebook as Meta.
Well, I did go and purchase one of these in order to learn more about this world. And I have to say, I was pleasantly surprised how well executed it is, but I still don't see any way that I want to wear one of these things, pretty much ever.
Right. I have to say though, reading Gates, COVID has enabled virtual reality. It will seem much less unnatural if we all do use our avatars for meetings. With the crisis of the office and the ongoing pandemic and the likelihood that there'll be new pandemics in the future.
Yeah,
And the fact
I
that
had
we're
an
more and
off.
more comfortable with virtual meetings and Zoom and all the rest of it, I do think that the timing now is more realistic. You remember when Scoble used to put on the virtual reality headset in the shower and everyone laughed at it? I think we're
Yeah.
way beyond that.
I had an offsite last week. There was 7 people at the offsite, and we were in a training room with a big square desk and a whiteboard, and it was very modern, very good. And people said how great it was to be sat around a table face to
Yeah.
face. Now, I'd previously used Horizon Work, which is an app on the Oculus Quest here. And in a small room, when you put it on, you get the impression of being in a very large room, not unlike the one we were in. And you are sat across the table from people who could speak to you. And you do have a whiteboard you can all draw on. It's the nearest to that real world experience I've seen, but and it's certainly better than Zoom and a flat screen in terms of the feeling of it. But it would involve 7 people putting on a headset. You sweat when you put these headsets on. It hurts your head after a while.
Yeah, I think, as so often, Apple will probably change everything with there's rumors that their VR product's going to come out next year.
Yeah, I wouldn't be investing in anything to do with AR and VR at this point. I think it's too early.
You think that Apple will change everything or not? Apple usually gets its timing right.
I think the science for augmented reality isn't there yet, even for Apple. And I don't think this really works until you have augmented reality. I don't think virtual reality, as in a closed environment, is going to work.
Well, you may be right. If Keith, you're usually pretty bullish, so when you're not, I listen very carefully. What about tweet of the week?
Tweet of the week this week is from Naval Ravikant. Naval is the founder of AngelList, and he said this, and I put it in because it's speaking directly to me this week. When building a portfolio of investments that can have non-linear outcomes, never sell early.
What does that mean, non-linear outcome?
It means that one of them is going to be big, another one is going to be much smaller, and it isn't a straight line, and you don't know which one it is. So if you've got a portfolio, several companies, and one of them starts to break out, never sell early, because you might be right most of the time, but the one time you're wrong will cost you most of your returns. So I've done that. I sold EasyNet early, my ISP in the 90s. But then I didn't sell real names when I could have done, and didn't make anything. So I sold. I was late, as in I missed an opportunity. And now at this ripe old age that I'm at, I have a number of portfolio companies that are doing really, really well. And the issue of should you sell comes up, and Naval's saying, no, don't sell, take the risk and go long. So I'm having a conversation with this tweet in my own head regarding my own situation.
You think he's right? I mean,
think
sometimes you have to sell if you need the liquidity.
Yeah, it depends. It's a very personal thing. It depends. I think the one thing I've learned is never keep everything and never sell everything. Keep some and sell some.
Well, you're disagreeing with him then. He's saying you should not do that.
I'm kind of disagreeing with him tactically, but I think the spirit of what he's saying is that you don't really know what's going to work. And if you sell early, it may be one of those. That certainly happened to me.
Should we be, finally, Keith, should we be Taking the risk on Web3, we've agreed it's inevitable. At what point do you start selling Web? I mean, it's not actually the right question. Is at what point do you start buying Web3 stuff, investments, ideas?
I think you start buying right away. I mean, I bought the Coinbase IPO. I think you start buying right away, but you obviously phase into it as it gets bigger. And unless you can afford to take lots of risk and lose money, invest in things that have already proven. In my case, I do take risk, but then I lose money sometimes.
What do you mean sometimes? You always lose money, Keith, but you also win something. You're a winner and a loser. And that was the week of December the 9th, 2021. We will be back next week where we will no doubt talk more crypto, more Web3, and more tweets of the week. We may even talk about Paul Graham. We haven't talked about him for about 3 or 4 weeks, Keith. We need to reintroduce Paul Graham. Maybe we can turn Paul Graham into a Web3 project.
Maybe, well, yes, maybe we can.
Good. Repeat well. And we'll talk again next week. Hope everyone has a good week. Make money. Don't sell. And we will return next Friday. It won't be a Thursday. Special show this week, but usually we'll be back on Friday. So we'll see you next Friday.
Adios, amigos.